Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Community Engagement Series. My name is Priscilla Medeiros. I'm the Knowledge Mobilization and Community Engagement Specialist at the Edwin S.H. Leong Center for Healthy Children, as well as your moderator for today's session. I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today. We're joined by Dr. Nicole Racine, who is a clinical psychologist, assistant professor, and director of the Early Lab at the University of Ottawa. She holds the research chair in child and youth mental health at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, where she collaborates with clinicians and community partners to conduct research on child trauma. Her research examines the impact of early adversity in early childhood and identifies prevention and intervention approaches that promote resilience. We're also joined by Katelyn Greer, who's a research assistant and consultant specializing in peer support and research engagement. She draws from her personal journey navigating mental health challenges in her youth and channels those experiences into meaningful work as a peer support worker, specializing in working with youth and families. And she has contributed extensively to various levels of engagement in the research cycle, from co-authoring papers to offering guidance to over 10 youth advisory councils. So I'm very incredibly excited to have them both join us today. Their presentation will explore strategies and approaches for engaging youth in health research. So welcome to both of you. I'm certainly going to pass it off now to start your presentation.
Yes. Hello, everyone. We have a mouthful of a title of our presentation today. So it's Empowering Change, Integrating Youth Perspectives and Community-Based Approaches to Child Maltreatment. And we're coming from the University of Ottawa and Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. So thank you to them and also the Leong Center for inviting us. Over to you, Nicole.
Great, thank you. We'll start off today with a bit of a land acknowledgement. I'm in Ottawa, so this is the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, and they've been the traditional caretakers of our land. And Katelyn is in Calgary, Alberta, which is Treaty 7 territory and home to Métis Nation 5. And this is actually a picture from Kananaskis, which is just outside of Calgary. And Katelyn and I actually met when I was living in Calgary for 7 years. But I know that for both of us, this is land and space that we're really grateful to have been able to enjoy, and also want to pay homage to individuals who have kept it and taken care of it prior to us being here.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add a few more points about myself. I know Crystal already did a really great introduction, but it might be important for you to know that I also have lived experience of child abuse and neglect, and I was in the foster care system. So that's where I'm coming from today. So just to keep that in the back of your mind for like my perspectives going forward. Nicole, is there anything else you wanted to add to your introduction?
Um, Professionally, no, but I think in terms of maybe positioning and situating ourselves, I want to acknowledge for myself that um, as a researcher, I and clinician, I'm a clinical psychologist, come to this work really mindful of the position of power that often as researchers we find ourselves in, and the platform that we have to elevate voices that often are disregarded. And within the space of child maltreatment research, unfortunately, that really has been the case for children and youth. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I'll just position myself in that space. And I hope that from today, you'll mostly hear from Katelyn, because I think her perspective is the one that's most important for you to hear about. And then I'll chime in with mostly the things I've learned, because there has been lots of it, and some of the co-learning that we've done together.
Oh, I couldn't have said it better. Okay, we want to tell you a little bit more about how we connected with each other and met. And I might not get this 100% right, so Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were introduced through another professor that I'd been working with previously. I mostly worked in like broadly child and youth mental health, and I was engaged like at the very beginning as a participant. Like that was like my whole thing. I was just so interested in it and I kept doing it. And that's how I got those roles later on. And then that person introduced me to Nicole. And Nicole, do you remember the first project we worked on together? Do you remember that?
So I had been wading into the waters of youth engagement, and especially had been quite a bit of research in child health more broadly. So some work individuals were doing, say, in pediatric pain or in cancer. And I remember looking at some of the literature that was coming out and hearing about some of what people were doing, and I was like, oh, is anyone doing this in child maltreatment and child trauma and child mental health? And the resounding response I got was like, no. And also, we're not really sure like that's something you can do. You know, have you really thought about this? Have you thought about the risk? Have you thought about the implications of that? And so I was consulting with a senior mentor, and they were like, well, actually, you know, there's this individual, Katelyn, I've learned a tremendous amount from them. You should connect with them. So we went for coffee. And from there, I think we were just discussing so many of the ideas that we had that we decided to collaborate on a paper together. And I'm really grateful to Katelyn because I brought the scientific, maybe I guess, researcher perspective, and Katelyn was like, "Oh, like I view this using these metaphors, and here are these artistic ways I could see us representing this. And oh, by the way, if you ever want to talk to youth, don't say that. You should say this." And so we were really, I was really grateful for that.
Yeah, and I actually want to touch on something Nicole just mentioned. So the we met in a coffee shop. Like that seems like a nothing detail, but that's actually a huge deal because like in a lot of my previous work or engagement with research, like that was actually pretty radical for someone to this sounds so bad to say out loud, but treat me like a human being. Like, and there wasn't like something like weird or wrong with me that they were just comfortable. Like Nicole was just comfortable enough to meet me in a coffee shop. So it was actually like a really good informal connection. And I think those are actually really important. So like that seems like a nothing detail, but it's actually very cool. And yes, so the slide we have here, that's the article that we wrote together. So like maybe you want to take a look after this presentation. Yeah. And now we're working on the Better Together project, which I'm going to show you a video of now, and then maybe Nicole will want to expand on that a little bit after. Okay, I'm going to play the video. Hi, my name is Katelyn Greer. I'm a youth with lived experience, and I'd like to tell you more about the Better Together project. The Early Lab at the University of Ottawa has started the Better Together project to identify the top 10 research priorities for child maltreatment in Canada. Our goal is to collect questions that young adults and their families have regarding the impact of child maltreatment and ways to prevent it. We will distill these questions to the top 10 research priorities and share them with the public, researchers, and national policymakers to shape the focus of future research and change the lives of youth and young adults with histories of maltreatment across Canada. We would love to hear from young adults with lived experience of childhood abuse and neglect, their parents, carers or family, and professionals who work with youth with a history of child maltreatment, such as healthcare providers, psychologists, teachers, and social workers. Why do the voices of young adults matter for research? They matter to me because I experienced childhood abuse and neglect myself. I want to have youth voices front and center guiding research. I want to make a big change in the way we think about childhood abuse and neglect. The only way we can do that is to hear everyone's voice, especially young adults. So I'll just add like a few other like maybe nothing details again, but clearly that's me. So I'm at the forefront of this. And what's really cool about this, I made that video. And one of the youth that we work with actually made all the music for that video too. And like no one may know that unless I shared that. So very cool to know.
So I'll share a bit of the background of the Better Together project. When Katelyn and I were discussing youth engagement and talking about how we might be able to integrate that into the field of child maltreatment research, we talked a bit about the importance of research being driven by youth perspectives. And you'll see a lot of that in the literature on youth engagement. And I think, that's important. And how you go about doing that can look in a number of different ways. But the James Lind Alliance, which is out of the UK, actually has quite a formal process that you can follow for identifying research priorities. And we decided to follow this approach in part because of the scientific rigor, but also you get partnered with someone who helps co-lead the project, who has a lot of experience in doing this work. And we have found it really valuable to have this perspective. But really, I think we wanted to know from the perspective of youth, what are the top research priorities for child maltreatment research? And then the goal is really for this to just drive what we do for, the rest of my career, certainly, and for, some of the work that Katelyn is involved with also. We are deep in this work. We have done a first initial survey where we received hundreds of responses, and then you basically go through all of them and they get categorized into groups. And then there's a second survey that we're about to do. We're also doing focus groups with specific underrepresented groups. So in child welfare and in child maltreatment, sexual and gender diverse youth are overrepresented. Black and Indigenous youth are also overrepresented. And so we want to make sure that those voices are heavily weighted, not just from our survey, but also from coming out together through these focus groups. And that's sort of an addendum. You don't usually do that in the James Lind Alliance, but that is something that we're doing. And Katelyn leads our youth advisory committee. So we have an advisory of between 8 and 10 youth who are participating at any given time, youth that represent really quite a diverse background and diverse identities. And Katelyn, they've named themselves the youth consultation panel. So that this is the YCP, we call them. This is what they have named themselves. And really because they view themselves as having a consultative role to our project. Katelyn is the lead or peer support worker of that group. So she is the main conduit between our research steering committee that has clinicians and researchers. But Katelyn is the one who primarily communicates with us. So our youth advisory doesn't actually attend our steering committee meetings, and that's intentional because often it's not easy for youth to feel like they can contribute, or there's pretty huge power imbalances in those spaces. So what we do is we have the youth all together. There's usually something that they're providing us a perspective on, and then Katelyn consults back. Sometimes we're invited as the researchers to attend their YCP if there's specific things they want to communicate to us, or there's something like we're working on intensively together. But I would say, and Katelyn, you can jump in, there's sort of a self operating unit, and they tell us, what they need, and we have to be ready and open to receive that. In the summer, they let us know that was a special call for perspectives in youth engagement, and that they would like to put together a paper representing their perspectives from the work that we've done. And so we said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. We supported them in an outline, but in writing that cover letter, I said, I can vouch for the scientific and intellectual integrity of this work, but ultimately, our youth committee actually wrote this, and this is their intellectual property. So I think I almost cried reading that paper, to be honest, because it was so powerful to read. But so this just gives you a bit of an idea of how things how we operate.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, like it's something, an interesting process that I see happen in a lot of my work. Like if they name themselves, I'm like, oh, that's a good sign. Like they name themselves, that's awesome. And what I'm noticing as things move along is like I feel like they need me less and less. So they might be like fully joining the steering committee meetings on their own and like feel that empowered to engage in that way. So it's to be determined. We'll see if I even need to stick around or if they feel like fully empowered to I don't need to be there anymore. They got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I will say too from the video, I think is unique in especially the work that we're doing in youth maltreatment and trauma in identifying herself as being an individual with lived experience. We have some youth on our panel where that isn't the case, and so being flexible with that, don't necessarily always have youth who want, like Katelyn, like to come to a conference or be on the Leong rounds. There are youth actually who say like no, they don't have any interest in being being self-identified, and even on work that we've published use an alias. So that's I think just something to be mindful of, that there's definitely a range and degree of comfort with that.
Okay. Thank you so much for noting that, Nicole. That's very important to know. Okay, so we have some objectives for our presentation. I'll let Nicole speak to that. Oh, sorry, Nicole.
Oh, no worries.
Whoop, went forward too. Okay, there we go.
So I think what we're hoping to do is provide a background on the benefits of youth engaged research, as well as talk about, we don't just want to talk about the things that have gone extremely well and pat ourselves on the back. We also want to talk about potential pitfalls and risks and where we've experienced some challenges. We thought we'd talk about some of the methods that have informed some of our own co-creation work, and then at the end, really talk about real world examples and I think open it up. We're a small enough and intimate enough group that we're really happy to entertain and field questions. In terms of defining youth engaged research, um, this can really be so there's can be a full spectrum of how youth can be engaged and involved in research, and this can occur at all stages of the research process, including governance, planning, priority setting, research execution, data interpretation, and knowledge translation. And it's really, I think, up to the interest of specific youth, but being able to envision how youth can be involved in all aspects of research, I think, is really important. And you can match with what their interests might be. I think really envisioning youth as research partners. In our work, youth are co-applicants, are co-investigators on the work that we do, and that's intentional for like to position youth in those roles. And we also, I think this idea of transitioning away from thinking about uh, participants, and I find like this is the thing REBs struggle with the most, is they're used to dealing with, okay, how do we treat research participants versus how would you treat a co-investigator, collaborator, or consultant in the research that you're doing. And um, Katelyn has a ton of expertise in youth engagement. She's worked in with several PIs on dozens of projects. She's led all of them. She's presented at many conferences. She's a peer support worker in her actual life. So she has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in this space and has an expertise the researchers on our team don't have. I'm I'm terrified of social media. Like if someone asks me to do something on social media, that like literally terrifies me. And so I think viewing youth and their perspective as an expertise that's brought to the team and then valuing it as such is really important.
Yeah, and just like going off that, I'm just thinking about a conference I spoke at maybe a few weeks ago, and the group I was speaking to, like it was mind blowing for them to hear. It's like we're not talking about people as research participants, we're talking about them as equal partners, and it was like just mind blowing for me to explain like. No, you're not treating them as a participant. You don't have to do all this RED stuff. It's different because they're an equal partner. Like, how would you treat an equal partner? How would you treat your colleague in the work? And that's what we're talking about today. So we're not talking about participants. I think this group gets that. We're talking about youth as partners.
And maybe that goes back to our initial meeting too, Caitlin, because if I was meeting like with another co-investigator, and I was really interested in working with them, and I thought they were really smart, and I really valued their contributions to the field, I would be delighted if they went for coffee with me, if they were willing to do that. And that would definitely be an initial starting place. So, were you going to say something, Caitlin?
Go for it,
Okay.
Nicole.
Okay. So in our work, we use the UN definition of youth to include individuals under the age of 25. Um, we've had youth involved in our advisory who are like, I'm 26 and I really want to be involved. Does that mean I'm cut off? So we're flexible on that. But I think we just, in terms of, the research process, we do that. The youth who are engaged in our project are over the age of 18 for the most part, and we have done this for a few reasons. One, to circumvent any legal challenges related to consent to participate, as well as disclosures around experiences of maltreatment and abuse, and us as researchers and clinicians having like a legal obligation to uh, do something about that. And of course, we would have legal obligation if someone's is, harmed or hurt anyways. But this, I think, has been helpful in certainly with our research ethics and things like that. I think this is a limitation. I think in our own work, younger voices, I would love to prioritize them more. And we've written in the paper that we showed you some of the big limitations and ways in which we need to circumvent and overcome this. We also review papers of research projects that have engaged youth who are younger.
Yeah, just side note, I'm working on a separate project that is engaging people under 18. And I just don't think the world is ready for that right now. The systems are not ready. We're ready, the youth are ready, but the systems are not necessarily ready for that at this time.
Yeah, I think is a really good comment. So, and we started this work in 2020 and 2021. So, and there were not very many guidelines on how to do the work. So we were just sort of trying to figure it out and thinking, okay, what is the most ethical way to go about doing this? And so we made that decision at that time. And then for our purposes, when we talk about child maltreatment, we're referring to abuse and neglect and exposure to violence. One thing we've learned from our youth is they consider child maltreatment and abuse to be much bigger. They consider the definition to be much bigger than we would in the research field. And I think constantly push us to think about systemic violence, for example, bullying, things that they view as being um, violence and abuse, and pushing us, I think, actually to broaden those definitions.
Awesome.
So I think in terms of the importance of youth engagement in child maltreatment research, many people here I think will know this, but really it's the idea of putting youth and perspectives at the forefront. I've already mentioned um, histories of systemic violence and underrepresentation, especially for Indigenous youth, racialized youth, and socially disadvantaged youth, especially in the child welfare system. In child maltreatment research, there's an over-reliance on parent and caregiver perspectives, and um, there is also research around whether or not a youth's perspective should be considered in like child welfare placements, where they end up, what their trajectory might be. And so even in practice, this isn't something that's necessarily done. And so the research is pretty similar. And so the research hasn't historically been informed by the perspective of children and youth. And we're really seeing this in some of the uh, priorities that are coming forward. And we're really excited to come to a more finalized version of that.
Yeah, and adding to that, I think a lot of people get very scared because this work is very complex and there is some risk, both for like researchers and the young people that are being engaged. However, I think the risk is so much higher to not do it. If you don't engage youth, the risk you're putting them at is so much higher. So I just want you to consider that going forward. Like there's more risk to not do it than to engage youth. So I get you're scared and you might not feel fully confident to engage youth, but it's so important and it's in such dire need right now to be done that, yeah, weighing the risks. Okay.
One of the things that came out from our survey in the priority setting was many youth actually, so we asked them, it seems kind of ridiculous. We say, like, what's important to you? What kind of questions do you have? What do you think are the most important questions? And what a lot of youth told us, they were actually much more narrative, where they were talking about some of the challenges and things that they've experienced, and those ultimately lead to questions. And reading some of those narratives, I think, made us realize, like, oh my gosh, youth really don't feel heard and don't feel like their perspective is at the forefront in this space. So it's important. For researchers, there are many benefits. So first of all, if you submitted a grant application to a Tri-Council funding agency in the last 12 months, most of them have a requirement for having an individual with lived experience on your team or part of the team, or demonstrating some kind of co-creative process. So that's, it's, I think, from a researcher perspective, there's a lot of motivation for people to do this. It also enhances the meaning of the work by a long shot. Um, I think doing some of this work has been some of the most meaningful work in my career, because I feel like um, we're being driven by values and interests that are not my own, that are actually from youth who are impacted by these experiences. Research becomes more relevant. There's a broadening of research questions and priorities, enhanced trustworthiness of findings, and increased dissemination beyond academia. And I'd say the research on some of the outcomes of youth engagement is so-so. I think it's demonstrated that there are some, for example, shifts in self-efficacy, increased perceived social support from youth, but I think it really depends on the outcomes you want to measure and the outcomes you're interested in seeing.
So I wanted to tell you about some of the benefits for youth when they are engaged. So they might experience increased empowerment, confidence, knowledge, and social connectedness. So what that looked like, I'll speak only for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of all of youth here, but this is like my personal experience. Like what that led to or looked like for me was like I got like a fulfilling career out of it. I had like a lowering of mental health symptoms overall. And I met others with lived experience or like allies such as Nicole, and I ended up feeling way less isolated and alone. And that was like a really big part of that experience, was feeling so isolated and alone. So So youth might experience like increased leadership, academic skills, development, communication skills, networking, team building, resume writing, all those kinds of things. And what that looked like in my personal life was I was able to learn experientially, so through doing. I believe I would have never been ready to engage or like via the education pathway. And I think that's a lot of the way that people go to like do that work is through like getting a post-secondary education. And it's like, I just know that was not for me and that's not the path I would have taken. So this research involvement as like a community member was like a pivotal opportunity for me to learn and engage and like make a difference in my life through like a different pathway other than post-secondary education. And like last one is mentorship. So I have met so many fantastic mentors such as like Nicole and like all the other great PIs I've worked for. And like a big part of my experience was like I had zero trusted adults in my life. Like all the adults in my life were pretty harmful. Like that's why I'm here. So yeah, I would have not had any of those like trusted adults in my life if I didn't engage in research. So those were some things that were pretty impactful for me. And like I do notice quite a few of these similar experiences in my peers, but like everyone's story looks different. So maybe
I
that puts.
find from the youth we worked with, the number one thing they actually are seeking is mentorship. And so they want to be involved in the research and contribute to it, but they also are really interested. They're so motivated and so you know, intelligent and contributing, and they want to further themselves and their careers. So when we, you need like a CCV or whatever for a grant, we're like, great news. They're like, oh my God, I don't have a resume. I've never done that. Okay, no problem. Let's meet together and through sort of an interview like process, like let's map this out. And then at the end of it, not in the CCV format, because I don't know if anyone finds that useful, but our youth find it useful to have like a Word document of their resume and something that's actually come out from working on the project together. And then also, connections to other people, opportunities for, research assistantships or, jobs or work. And like Katelyn said, like Katelyn, you have a PhD in youth engagement and you're a professional in this realm. And this is Katelyn's career. She's mapped out a career and been able to do that.
Yeah, and like something I'm noticing with a lot of the young people is like a lot of my understanding of like a lot of like patient engagement or like community engagement has been mostly done with adults. So this is where it looks different with youth is like these things are super, super important and you need to really almost prioritize them to make sure that the youth are getting something reciprocal out of the relationship. And those are the things that they like. So good stuff to know. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. There's so many frameworks out there. So it's like, I know everyone in this room might have a framework that they personally like and they personally use. And it's like, more power to you. If you're using one you like, keep doing what you're doing. Personally, I really like IAP2 because it's like really simple. It's really easy to follow. Like, I think it's pretty clear from just even this slide, like what it is. So I think your mileage may vary on all tools. And like, I think it's actually important to use them with more nuance and like wisdom. So I find a lot of people have knowledge of the tool. So you can look at it and read the tool and you have knowledge of the tool, but the wisdom is coming from after you've put that tool into practice and actually tried it out. And yeah, so I'll leave it there for now.
For this one, that was actually a tool Katelyn brought to our work. We were trying to sort out some roles or something. She's like, "Oh, well, do you know about this tool? Have you used it before? You should really consider talking about." I was like, "Oh, okay." So it was actually she was so well informed about these different tools that exist and how you can use them to guide identifying someone's role on a project.
Yeah, for sure. And like I don't know if you will remember earlier, but we talked about like the Youth Advisory Council and how they shifted their name to Youth Consulting Panel. So if you take a look at this, I think that's really interesting because I think advisory almost implies inform or like somewhere in there on the spectrum, and they've moved up the spectrum to be closer to empower now. So I think that's just like something interesting to know. So like there's a shift happening that you can notice just even based in the name that they chose for themselves. So again, here's some more frameworks. There's like tons out there. So like if you're a note taker, like note these frameworks down and maybe like use them in some of your work. But like honestly, I'm gonna tell you, I can give you all the frameworks in the world as a starting point, but it's really the putting them into practice that is the main thing here. So I suggest like listening and listening super intently to those that you're using the frameworks with, because they're going to tell you, those people with lived experience are going to tell you if the framework is working for them or is it not working for them. So like don't be like too dogmatic about it or like be like, this is the one we have to use. Like you got to have a little bit of flexibility there. Or you could also hire someone that has expertise in using frameworks and they already have that wisdom. Like I said before, there's a difference between knowledge of the tool versus wisdom in using it. Yeah, and like honestly, it's gonna look and feel completely different in every single group or context. Like every single time I engage youth or I'm in like a youth advisory council, it looks completely different every time. The frameworks could be all the same. We did everything the exact same, but like the recipe, the people are different, so the recipe's turning out different this time. Um, yeah. So just be humble and like prepared to gain like wisdom and knowledge for the people with lived experience that you're working with. Anything you want to add, Nicole?
No, just that when we started engaging in this work, Lisa Hawk was at CAMH and Joe Henderson, I think, had already been thinking about a lot of these ideas for a long time, and they put together this engagement guidebook. So we found it pretty helpful. Different institutions are creating their own now and also creating different offices of, youth engagement and how to do that. And I applaud institutions who are doing that, who are hiring people, giving like a full-time job to be involved in this type of work and dedicated towards doing it, because otherwise, as Katelyn will share, it ends up being like patchy putting together a bunch of different pieces of work in order to survive for youth who really want to dedicate themselves to this.
This one's pretty cool. This is actually from that paper that we wrote that we showed you at the very beginning. So I'll just let you take a look here. Nicole, is there anything you want to add to this?
Sorry, um my Zoom was all about to cut out, but I think I'm still here. Can you hear me okay, Katelyn? Yeah.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So this comes from the paper that Katelyn and I co-wrote together and is actually diagram that Katelyn produced and thought about, and we highlighted some of the major barriers that come up for youth and for researchers in engaging in youth engagement research, and then provide sort of some different ways that people can address it. So again, I don't think we'll spend too much time on this, but people are welcome to go and check it out.
Okay. So I think we spoke about some of these pitfalls earlier already, like with the confidentiality piece, like Nicole said earlier, like some people like really do not want to be identified as having lived experience. And yeah, and that's just what it comes down to. And we have to be respectful of that and like where they're at with that. So being mindful of like maybe allowing them to have a pseudonym that they're using for like co-authorship or like things like that. Yeah. And then there's like obviously so many systemic barriers to youth engagement. Like the space is very new and systemically, I don't know if we're necessarily always that prepared for it. And I think a way that shows up quite often is in compensation. That's always a struggle with every like institution across the board, I think. So that's something to keep in mind, but I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later.
In terms of the risks and pitfalls for researchers, I think there's some previous research that has shown that a major limitation on the part of research is actually feeling like there's no training in this regard, and that people would like to have more training. They don't know the how. of engagement research. And of course, most graduate programs don't have any kind of training in this. In the child maltreatment space, researchers are afraid of, re-traumatization or what happens if you bring several youth together who have history of maltreatment, or mental health issues, ethical issues around engaging youth, research ethics boards and how they respond, consent and assent, and then child protection and rights, which I think we've already talked about. One thing I'll say in all of our youth engagement work, we don't talk about the past that youth have of their experiences. We're focused on the future and their contributions to our future work. So all that we know is that youth have self-identified as having experiences, but we make it really clear up front that we are not here to know about what those are, or even really to engage in them. And so I think that's an important, really important part. We ask people to use their lens of the experiences that they've had, but not actually to share their experiences at all. Some of what we've commented also in the work that we've written is how we youth. And so these are just the trauma-informed pillars from SAMHSA. But I think really making sure that youth feel safe in the interactions that they have. Like Katelyn, you were really brave in sharing that a lot of the relationships that you had with adults in your life actually weren't ones that were safe, or weren't ones where felt like someone might have your best interests. And so feeling unsure in a youth engagement perspective around those same issues would be deeply problematic. And so actually the relational development and maintenance of the relationship and safety among the youth who are collaborating together is really critical. And just knowing, I think, making the assumption that especially if you're in the space of mental health or maltreatment, that everyone's had those experiences. And so I think there's definitely a handle with care and being forthcoming, being honest, and being transparent at all times.
We have a quote here from Nicole mentioned that paper that the youth consulting panel and I wrote together. So I'll read it to you. It can be exhausting telling the same story that often has a lot of pieces to it to different people. This is a big issue in therapy, social work, child welfare because of such high turnover rates in these fields. Youth are left consistently getting moved from person to person and having to retell their story with no clear answers. So when I mentioned the systemic barriers earlier, this is the quote that I think really exemplifies that, and that I think shows up in the research space as well, where it's like a lot of high turnover, a lot of different people involved. So you have to sometimes share a lot of different things that maybe you're not necessarily ready to share. So just something to keep in mind for the systemic issues that come along with engaging youth.
I think to keep in mind too, in the research world, sometimes like we staff up for a project and then you're like, okay, well, project's over. Now this is done. And sometimes I think not sometimes, I think the relationship with youth that you have across projects needs to be considered more in terms of its longevity and sustainability. And maybe that's also around how institutions and organizations want to fund that. Because I think to say, I think you can be forthcoming about a short-term project, and sometimes youth don't want to be involved in the long term. But I think to be able to have the trust from youth and have them truly engage, I think that's something we have to think about.
Oh yeah, love that point, Nicole. I would love if they were funded for longer periods. The grant cycle is pretty rough for that. Okay, strategies for doing youth engagement. So this is where facilitating authentic engagement is really important. So the youth that are coming into this work that are being engaged are super passionate. Like this is their life. Like this is life or death to them. Like they are so passionate about this work. So maybe bring a little bit of that passion yourself, just a touch. So that's what I try to do in my work. So checking researcher readiness. So a lot of researchers don't realize like we're also watching and observing you too. Like we're watching and observing you the entire time. So I was also collecting like information on researchers just as much as they're collecting information on me. So some signs that researchers might be safe are like to me if they don't like overreact when I share like my lived experience, they're open-minded, they're making active changes and being responsive. For me, it helps if it's like more informal and more personal. So checking youth readiness, this could look like noticing when people stop engaging or start engaging in a very different way and like just asking questions and being curious about like what caused that shift. So considering the approach to engagement and facilitation and like maybe integrating peer support. So the youth with lived experience often just like we kind of get each other. Like I don't want to say that like as a broad sweeping statement, but overall I'd say that's the case. And so there's an opportunity there for like natural peer support to emerge. And I think it's more helpful if you let that grow instead of like squashing it a bit, which I've seen some projects sadly do. Yeah, and it's actually beneficial and not a risk a lot of the time in my mind is letting that peer support happen. Yes, and then providing appropriate compensation and credit for engagement. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but to me, this looks like things beyond like the dollar amount. So like the stuff that Nicole mentioned earlier, like it's like co-authorship, the reference letters, the resume help, uh, setting them up with like different career opportunities or just having that conversation with them. Or like, it doesn't have to be one of those. It can be all of the above. All of the above would be fantastic if that's what the youth wants.
Caitlin, I'm mindful of our time. Do you want
Mhm.
to talk a bit about your role? And then maybe what we can do is open it up for questions because I think we've shared a lot of what our experiences have been along the way. And I just want to make sure people have time for that.
Sure. Do you want me to end the slideshow right now and open it for questions now?
Or do I think we've talked about your peer support work
Okay.
role and how you're a facilitator and how you've done that in our research group. Um, Maybe do you want to talk a bit about compensation? And then we can open it up for questions.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I know this is always a really tricky one for everyone. And like honestly, in the society we live in, like I think talking about money is a little bit of a taboo topic. So it feels kind of bad to talk about it sometimes, but it's really important because this is something I think people really need to get right. So as Nicole said before, there's not great guidelines, and it's really important to be transparent about like what the compensation is and will be. So in my opinion, $25 an hour is I don't know if anyone's looked, but I think $23 an hour is now the livable wage. So $25 an hour, I'm not 100% sure it's like the best rate anymore. And I don't think that just saying $25 an hour for lived experience is uh, capturing the expertise that some people are bringing. So for example, like if I have 10 years doing this work and I have like a different skill set, like I don't understand why the compensation isn't matching my skill set like in any other role. And I think that's like the same for other youth. Things like access to health benefits, like I'm doing this all on my own, so I have no health benefits. I'm getting paid a low wage. I have no access to health benefits. I'm not hired as like a formal worker, so there's often like zero like labor protections for me. Like if anything goes wrong, there's like a huge power imbalance there too. Then like the holistic model of compensation, which we talked about a lot, where it's like it's great that you're paying me, but like I need like some other stuff as well too, like just for my well-being. Yeah, and like the gift cards, probably not a great idea. I guess it really depends on the youth though. So like having that conversation and making sure that they're being compensated in the way that they want to be. Yeah, and then like because we're talking about youth, like this also gets a little bit complicated because there can be a lot of like uncertainty around that, like what you can pay someone like under 18, how many hours they can work, like things like that. Yeah, so like just being aware of like labor laws and things like that, I think is also very pivotal. And like a lot of the people might be on like AISH or other things, like again, having those conversations to make sure that they're being compensated in the way that works best for them.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Caitlin. I think in an ideal situation, I've seen models where people, if they have a grant or a project they're working on, they actually hire youth as, in a certain role on the project that then can be paid in a more comprehensive way, I think, which is ideal. So if you want to stop sharing, Katelyn, and then maybe we can open it up for questions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for a great presentation. I'd like to open it up now to any questions that folks on the call may have. Please feel free to raise your virtual hand. You're also welcome to leave your questions in the chat for our speakers, and I'll be sure to keep an eye on that as well. Oh, we have our first question. Carla, please feel free to unmute.
Hi, Nicole and Katelyn and Priscilla. Thanks for hosting this. I was curious because, Katelyn, in your opinion, is someone with a shared lived experience facilitating, um, is that something like that's crucial to the engagement, or or could you have someone who doesn't have that lived experience? Would it be the same? Like, what's your recommendation there? Does your lived experience need to match the youth's?
That's a great question. I'm taking a moment to think about it. My initial response is it's extremely helpful. Like it's ideal if you can get that. I think that would be best. And I think it's also a form of giving back to the community. Like if you say you care that much about the community, then why aren't you hiring someone with that lived experience? You know what I mean? Like if they can do the role and they're qualified to do it, like then that's ideal in my mind. But obviously if they have everything else except for the lived experience, like I just think the lived experience should be weighted a little bit more than some of the other things, because a lot of the other things can be like trained up, and that could be something again where you're giving back to the community by training this person and giving them further skills. Whereas like the person that maybe has all the skills, like they can't be taught the lived experience piece, if that makes sense. So that's my initial response, but you got to do what you got to do.
I think in our case too, with Katelyn facilitating our YCP, I think there's responses she's gotten from our youth they would never have said to me, or they would never have said to my research coordinator, or the amount of time maybe it would have taken to build up that trust. Like we've given feedback before, oh, here's a suggestion. And they're like, we don't like that. And actually, we're not going to do that for these reasons. I'm positive they would not have. I don't think they would have ever said that to me. And so I think Katelyn's role as a peer facilitator is so important.
An excellent question, Carla. I'm looking to see if there are other questions from those on the call or in the chat for our speakers for today. Oh, I see Brooke's hand is raised. Go ahead, Brooke.
Hi, thank you both so much. What an outstanding presentation. I learned so much and I'm taking lots of notes for some of the work I do. This question is for Katelyn. I'm curious, Katelyn, about the meeting structure of the YCP, and if you have any recommendations around helping to build rapport and trust, especially in the early stages of a partnership with young people who may have really, diverse experiences and maybe new to this space.
Yeah, great question, Brooke. Well, I'll be honest, like I feel like I kind of dropped the ball on this, so this is like a key learning for me. Like I think having something consistent, where they can plan ahead of time. Like we ended up doing it more as needed or like ad hoc. So I think having the like some pre-planned meetings at the very beginning is very helpful to build that rapport, and like honestly, don't worry about the research at all. Like the first few meetings, focus on the relationship. Like right, relationship is primary in like all of this work. So like just focus on that. Like I think it's helpful to have a few like research activities to like bring the group together and have like a common goal. But like it doesn't need to be like deep diving into the work, just like some light stuff like that, and like having something consistent set up as well, I think really helps that as well, so they know what's coming. Yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now.
That was a really great question, Brooke. I was reflecting on some work that I've also been involved with. And to your point, Katelyn, it's so important to foster that trust and relationship from the onset, and it does take time. And there are so many challenges as researchers we bump up against with the constraints of timelines that sometimes it's difficult to build that into the structure or those milestones that you're looking to achieve. But you're right, researchers need to be prioritizing that piece when they're planning to lead meaningful and authentic engaged type initiatives, such as the ones that you're involved with.
And I will add, it's like maybe don't force the relationship as well. Like it's okay if it's not working. Like I've been on projects, like I will admit, like complete face plant. Like the group just did not mesh. And you need to like notice if the group is like not getting along together. Like maybe it's time to do like one-on-one sessions with every single youth instead. So like don't try to force something that's clearly not working because it's not gonna help.
That's very good feedback to those on the call who are researchers to not try to force the cohesive nature of bringing youth together or bring partners together. Sometimes you have to pivot and think of more creative and innovative ways of working together.
And I think normalizing what we ghosting, I've had youth who've been involved in a project and then like they're MIA. And we could do a deep dive on if that's a failure on my part. Maybe. I don't actually know. Or if they had, taken or what they needed, or there was something that didn't feel like a fit. But we kind of normalized that in our group just because of the space. And not that we're not sensitive, but we try not to overanalyze, when someone doesn't want to be engaged anymore, because ultimately that's their decision.
That's an excellent point. There's ebbs and flows to this, and everyone has the decision of when they've achieved what they're looking for, and part of that partnership with researchers. Absolutely. So just checking in with the virtual space. We have 2 minutes left on the call for today. So I guess before we part ways, one of my final questions to both of our speakers is things we've already been touching upon, but what advice would you leave with researchers and trainees today around if they're planning to engage youth for the very first time that they should be considering?
Want to go first, Katelyn?
No, you go ahead, Nicole.
I think leading with humble and relational stance. I think acknowledging that often as in our work as researchers, you have to be an expert in something, and acknowledging this is a space where you're not, and that there's a lot to be learned. And I think relationships will unfold well through that stance, and so I think that would be my advice, and trust that you can form that.
Great piece of advice. Katelyn, yourself?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add at this point. I know we're getting close to time, but yeah, like I get it's scary. I'll say this, I get it's scary and it might feel scary to do some of this work, but like the benefits are going to outweigh like the scariness so much. So please, I feel like I scared people into not doing youth engagement. So please do youth engagement. It would be awesome if you did. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the projects and work that comes out of this.
I can assure you, you haven't scared anyone. I think you've left a lot of, food for thought for those who are considering doing this work, and again, doing it in very intentional and meaningful ways. So thank you very much to our speakers today for joining us and sharing their incredible work in the realm of youth engagement. For those on the call, thank you again for also attending today's community engagement series. This is our final event before the winter break, so I look forward to seeing you at our next event in 2025. So thank you very much and have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day.